Hi, Kevin. I'm Laetitia. I'm editor of 201 from Bromsgrove School. Pleased to meet you. It's virtually, but it's nice to get to know you better.
No, it's good to see you. I always like to see who are the rising journalists. So I know you might be employing me in a few years if you'll give me a job. So where are you? Are you in Belgium?
Yeah, I'm currently at home because of everything being online in school. So yeah, and I'm working on the latest edition of the 201 actually, everything virtually. So it's interesting. It's a new challenge.
Yeah, it's the same for us. I would normally be in Parliament in the House of Commons, where I'm the Daily Mirror's associate editor of politics. You can wander around, talk to MPs, ministers, the Prime Minister sometimes if you know where to stand and nab him. But now I'm in London in my home, working from here, like a lot of people. You go into Parliament now and everyone's wearing masks, so you can hardly have a really good conversation with somebody from 2 meters when you've both got masks.
Yeah, I can definitely imagine that. I mean, I feel like it's changed a lot of journalism because it's the same for us. We also tend to do interviews. I mean, it's obviously not as important as you, but we take the view of students and everything. And it's just nice to have that human connection. I think that's what I also really like about journalism is just this connection. And I feel like with COVID, everything is really changed. And I feel like for a few years, it will be quite awkward because we have to get back into everything and it'll take some time with the measures. I mean, hopefully what Boris Johnson has announced will stick to the plan, but we'll see.
It's the first time in his life if he sticks to a plan, but I hope he does. But you're right. I mean, one of the great things about being a journalist is you have a license to be nosy, to go and ask people questions. Do it politely, do it nicely, but you can do it. And it's always better if you can see somebody face to face than ringing them on the telephone, doing it on Zoom, WhatsApp, messaging them in any way. Much better going. But everything you're doing and all the problems you have because of COVID, it's the same with us. So it's actually it is the same. We're all journalists. We're just doing it. You're doing it at school at that level. I'm doing it at a newspaper and on TV and radio, as you might be, and a lot of other people might be who'll be watching in a few years' time.
Hopefully, yes. I'm just gonna go straight in and ask you a few questions from the cohort of students. I've asked you questions from my school, and I think one of the main things that came up was, what is your take on the whole issue with being politically correct nowadays? Because I find it can be quite difficult. I find myself restricted just because I want to give an opinionated piece, but also to a point where I don't hurt anyone who's reading it and, remain respectful and nice. And I was just wondering what your advice would be on how to write such pieces.
Yeah, I don't have any problems with what's called political correctness or wokeness now. And they're terms used by people who are really the enemies of being polite. It's just being respectful. That's what it is. And never call anybody anything you wouldn't want to be called yourself, that you couldn't justify to their face. And you can express any view you like. It's just how you do it. And if you want to go out and you just want to offend people deliberately, well, that's fine. I'm not sure how far it'll get you and whether we learn very much about it. So I don't find it at all restrictive. I think there are lots of debates around ethnicity, sexuality, the trans question. I think you need to be careful and you need to be respectful, but you can still tackle them.
Yeah, definitely. No, I agree with that. I think it was a bigger issue in our school because we're such an international cohort.
Yeah.
I think there's often questions about how to approach it. And when you're young, people often say, I mean, your opinion, you're still shaping your opinions. So I think it's quite difficult to navigate the crowd. And nowadays, with more and more being said about being politically correct and everything, I think it can be restrictive, but I completely agree with you. That's wonderful advice. And yeah, following on with that question, I think it was about striking a balance between an opinionated piece, but also something that's not too biased, where you find a right balance. I guess it's quite a difficult question, but if you would have any advice on that would be wonderful for young writers.
Yeah, you can take a view and you can have an opinion if it's well informed, grounded in facts. I wouldn't say it was biased. Somebody else might have another opinion. You can respect that. That can be honestly held to. And when you're writing, you can, you can write encompassing everybody's views, or you can just give one view if you like. But if you're just giving one view, you need to understand the other views. You've got to be informed by, understand. That's what we do as journalists. Try to understand as you can. Doesn't mean you have to agree with them or disagree with them, but it's great. You just learn far more and just be aware when you're writing that there is another side. And I also think the most effective informed pieces are those where they're very broad. Still come to a point of view. You've got to be able to support your point of view. If you're writing a piece, it's probably best to think it through before you start typing. Although I do know some journalists who don't know where they're going to end when they're writing a piece. But it is, you can, I when I write or when I read, sometimes I like to see the piece where every point of view is expressed. There might be no conclusion, but you're informed and you're educated. And at other times, somebody might be very polemical, but as long as they're polemical in a very informed way, the facts are there, so you could support the case, then that can be a really good read, even if you don't agree with the conclusion.
Yeah, definitely. That's great advice. I agree with that because I often find it difficult. For example, in the news in Belgium, it's a bit different to the UK. A lot of more opinions I find. I mean, it's also the same, I guess, in the UK, but in Belgium, I don't know. It's more striking to me. So it's very interesting what you're saying to also look at it in that way. And yes, I think one of the problems, at least for me, I'm always the person who writes way too much. I always go into way too much details. And my teachers always say, oh God, you've written a whole thing for nothing. I mean, my coursework and everything, that's what gets condemned a lot for being too lengthy. So I guess, how do you find the right balance between giving enough detail and being concise as well? Because I don't want to bore my readers to death at the same time with too much.
But if an editor says they want you to write 300 words, 700 words, or 1,000 words, they mean 300 words, 700 words, or 1,000 words, particularly on a printed page. On the internet, you can go further, of course. It doesn't quite matter as much. And before, I'm in my second spell on the Daily Mirror. In between, I went to work for the Guardian newspaper in London for 6 years, and there was a journalist there, much older than me, and he said he'd been asked to write 500 words. He told his editor when he filed the copy of that, he said, "I'm very sorry, I didn't have time to write 500 words, so I've written you 800." And what he really meant was it is harder to write to length, and you've got to marshal your facts and your structure far better. You just learn it. It's a discipline. But if somebody asks, whatever it is, whatever that length is, just try to write to that length. And after a while, it becomes easier. But it's certainly harder, tougher to write something short than it is for something long. Because it's long, you can just go on and on and on and another thing. While if it's shorter, you've just got to think about it more in advance. But it just comes. It's a good technique. It's good training to do it. But always just try and hit it. If they say 300, 301, 299, doesn't really matter. 200, 400, that matters.
Yeah, definitely. I completely agree with that because I see it from both perspectives. I mean, I write, but I edit as well. So it's difficult sometimes to figure out what I should cut out from certain articles, and because ultimately it's people's opinions as well. I don't want to limit them too much, but I completely agree with that, to find the right balance. And I think a lot of students asked as well, how could young people break into political journalism and make sure they stand out? Because I guess nowadays I see a lot of people, we actually have a lot of political articles in our magazine. I mean, we try to have a lot of variety, but those really stand out as what people like to write the most. And I was wondering if you have any advice for young writers for that.
Yeah, I'm a visiting professor at Sunderland University in journalism, not astrophysics or mathematics. I go in there, speak and going to do seminars and lectures with people who want to be journalists. And I always say to get all the skills, of course. Make sure you can write. Shorthand, I think, is very good. Trying to be accurate. But I say you want to get a job, you want to be a political journalist or a sports journalist, or you want to write about food, whatever. I say just get a job as a journalist. Don't just restrict yourself early on. Just apply to any website, newspaper, radio, TV, anybody who will give you a job. and keep your eye on the prize if it's politics you want to do later on, but don't just restrict yourself to politics. You might change your mind as your career goes, and you may not want to write about politics. Or if you do write about politics, try and maneuver to do the stories publication you're on or the news outlet about politics. Look for jobs you can go to, but just get a job in the first place. And some places on politics will want you to have a very political view, broader, more across the waterfront, so you can think a lot of things. I always think if you start, you can just see the whole waterfront, all points of view. I think it's a much better position than just going in with blinkers and saying you're only going to be right, you're only going to be left.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. It's quite nice for us because we let anyone who wants to write anything can choose what they want to write. So I write mainly political articles, but I also enjoy writing poetry, which I never knew I could do before. I think I started 2 years ago, and I always thought, oh, that's not for me. Yeah, so that's very nice. And I think nowadays also one of the things that came up. Sorry, one of the big questions that came up was how do you manage to find sources and information on issues that are in an opaque political regime? I think it's quite difficult because we have some students who want to write about countries that have authoritarian regimes, and they find it quite hard to find that information because, like you said, we need facts to back up our arguments. And if you would have any advice for that, I mean, it's quite a tough question.
Yeah, like I've got huge admiration for good journalists, independent journalists in places like China or Russia who face dangers and threats I just do not in Britain. It's incredibly difficult for them. For those of us on the outside, and I've done a fair bit of foreign reporting. I've gone to places to do specific stories and so on. For those of us on the outside, if you're going somewhere, you've got to plan it in advance to see people, because you can't just normally turn up and find out who you should talk to. So speak to as many people as you can. Often NGOs, non-governmental organisations, trade unions, business groups, people in politics who you think might be sympathetic. And so on, but it's tough. It is really tough, and because the beauty now of the internet is you can make contact, but you can never be quite sure if it's somebody you haven't met before, whether they're the real deal or not. So you got to be aware that they may be taking you along, and what they say may not be factually based. But you can do it. It's a bit trial and error, and in truth, it requires judgment. And if you feel comfortable with someone, they're more likely to be authentic. But you can also be conned at times. So it is tricky. There's no easy answer. It's be on your guard. Try to speak to as many people as you can, and hopefully that way you'll get a feel for what's happening. But no, in authoritarian regimes, it's very difficult. What you must never do in authoritarian regimes, where people's lives can be on the line, not just their jobs and their freedom, but their lives, is if somebody speaks to you confidentially, you've got to keep them confidentially. Do not reveal who you were spoken to, because the stakes are so high for them.
Yeah, definitely. I agree with that. I mean, my sister lived in China for quite some time, and my other sister lived in Russia. So I went to visit them. I had the luck to go and see them, and I really saw the change and how it was for them. And the luck I have to express myself, because I really have a platform to give my opinion. So I completely agree with you that it's very important to keep safe people that give you the information.
Yeah, I've been to China a few times to report, and you notice the minders pretty quickly.
Yeah, I can imagine, but that must have been so interesting also to visit it. I don't really remember my time there. I was quite little, but I remember it being very interesting.
Yeah, don't leave your phone or laptop anywhere.
I know, yeah, that's the big thing.
Yeah, that's it. Say, Chinese people are wonderful, but the regime is authoritarian.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's also a problem nowadays. I guess I find that at times, because I do most of my research and everything I do related to journalism is a lot on my computer as well. Mm-hmm. I don't know. I wonder do you still take notes when you interview, like on paper, when you interview people, or?
I do. Yeah, I use shorthand. If you can learn it, it's a very quick way of being able to write. It's a bit of a pain to learn the alphabet and the words, but it's very quick. You can just take you can take notes down, and if you record, you've got to play it back, so that takes a long time. If you've got hours or days, that's fine. But sometimes in journalism, you interview somebody and you've got to file it immediately, and you've just got to look at your notes and type in really quickly. The more you do it, the easier it becomes. But that's where I think shorthand is good now. But I always take notes. It's wherever I am, I just scribble notes. It almost becomes second nature, and you will do it. But you have to do everything, check people's names, what their jobs are, who they are, get all those little things accurately. Then you can do the big things, and people will believe you. But people don't believe you if you get all the little things wrong. But now I take notes all the time. I scribble on bits of paper.
Yeah, that's nice to hear that we still have some sense of like not having technology overwhelm us, because I feel like with COVID even more, it's really difficult. I mean, I have no break from my screens. I'm always on them, and I do everything on them. So it's nice to hear that at least also.
Oh yeah, almost all the best interviews are done face to face. If you can go to see somebody rather than just doing it on Zoom or ringing out, it's so much better, because if you go and see them, you can gauge much better how they behave. They'll be more relaxed. You can have small talk before and after, when you can pick stuff up you can use and get the context. It is much better. But I can see sometimes if you're really rushed or with COVID restrictions, you have to do it online like this. But normally, I would have hoped I would have come to see you and would have, I reckon you would have picked things up. I would have probably answered better as well, to be honest.
No, you've answered wonderfully. I mean, it's quite interesting to do these interviews online, because as you said, it's not the same. So, but I had one final question that I came up with. It's kind of with this new law that they have in Australia. Yeah, your take on the new law to have Google and other social media platforms pay for news. How do you think that will change the way we get access to news? And I feel like it's become
they're very parasitical.
Yeah, I think it's quite a, but
I know. At the end of the day, they're huge corporations based in the US, out to make money, and they want to control news and views. Now, I think in democracies you need legislation to control them, and if they're taking the news from other publications, other sources, they should have to pay it back in some way. And they used to always pretend they were just platforms, not publishers. They're clearly publishers, and they're now having to become more responsible. But it's a big battle. The internet is in its relative infancy. It's relatively new, but it's hugely important. Who controls the internet? Who controls the news, and who pays for it? Because if Google and Facebook can just take news from other organizations, they're going to get the advertising, and the organizations that are paying for the journalism, paying for the journalists, are not going to have any money coming in. So it's a big issue. But I just think, in principle, Facebook and Google, if they're going to use other people's work and other people's news, then they should have to pay for it.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. And I think it's changed a lot ever since the pandemic started, because there was so much misinformation, and constantly, I mean, you had your phone bing. I still have it all the time, and it's quite intense because you have so much. And I think that was a huge issue in the pandemic that caused such panic, is that there was so much misinformation. And ultimately that just defeats the whole purpose of journalism, really. So I agree with you on that.
Journalists and journalism can get things wrong. We have to correct them when we do. But Facebook, for instance, makes a fortune out of conspiracy theories. Nonsense, because so many people will flock to it. But it's almost presented as news when it's not. It's a load of nutters coming up with weird, damaging theories and propagating lies as the truth. It has to be challenged. We can challenge it as journalists, but I also think Facebook and the others have a responsibility. They shouldn't just allow it to go up. We saw Twitter was very happy for a long time that Donald Trump would lie and whip people up because they got a lot of eyes on Twitter, and that was commercially good for them. until right at the end, they decided he should be banned when they could see he wasn't going to be much use to them anymore. I thought it was incredibly cynical by Twitter.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it's true. I think a lot of times people brought it up about banning him ever since the start, and they never really did that. So it's
No.
Interesting to see. But I was going to ask you one final question, if you have any more general advice for young writers of any form, really, who want to begin a career in journalism or simply for school magazine issues, anything really.
Yeah, if you want to be a journalist, become a journalist, and practice journalism. Write for your school magazine. Write for anywhere that will publish your stuff. Start a blog if you like. Get a group of you, put an online publication. But it's a great way to spend your life and make a living. You might get more money as an investment banker in the city, but you won't have as much fun as you will as a journalist. And also, don't expect to get the first job you apply for. You just keep on applying. If you get rejected, it's not often about you. It's just they were looking for somebody else, or so many people have applied. They can't look at everybody properly. So just keep on going. If you want to be a journalist, you'll become a journalist, and it's fantastic. And of course, really at my age, I should be putting you off. Otherwise, you'll all be coming along and taking my job. And I want to see the next generation of journalists come through, and that's you. Yeah, go for it. Hold the part to account, punch up, not down, and have a good time.
That's very good advice. Thank you very much. This was really interesting for me, and it was great to meet you. And hopefully one day I can meet you in person, as you said, like real journalists do.
Yeah, I know. I look forward to it. Really nice talking to you. Good luck in what you do. I hope you follow your dream and stay safe in the pandemic.
Thank you very much. It's very good advice.
Yeah, bye. Bye.